Let's do some dumb football questions here
Yes.
before we part ways. You can always submit your dumb football questions. No question is too dumb to make it to the show here in the YouTube comment section. Click that subscribe button and the like button on the O-Line Committee YouTube channel. And while you're at it, why don't you take your butt over to aura.com, aura.com/O-Line Committee, and start your free 2-week trial. You can help the show, by the way, when you start a free 2-week trial. So the odds of falling victim to an online crime in 2024 are 1 in 4. Also, have you ever put your name into a Google search? Yeah, a lot of information about you, your relatives, maybe even your health records, your previous addresses, things that might be unsettling when you put your name into a Google search. That's where Aura comes in, the sponsor of today's podcast, an all-in-one protection platform from identity theft to scams, online threats across your devices for the whole family. You can even monitor your kids' devices and block harmful content and manage how much time your kids spend online. Again, you can help the show by going to aura.com, aura.com/O-Line Committee and start your free 2-week trial and get protected from online threats. And even once you start paying, it's only like $12 a month. Very affordable and very easy to install. So,
And by the way, I'm with Boone. My kids ain't getting a phone until they're at least 16.
okay.
I'm a little earlier than him. I'm with you, Mac. Once they start
He's like
driving,
30. Once they're 30, they
once
can get their phone.
once they're married and with children, they can have a phone. No, but I'm with Boone on the fact that no phones till you're 16 and you're driving.
Once you have your second kid, then maybe you can have a phone. Okay. On your second marriage. Okay, let's go to the dumb football questions. Arbitrate says, if there wasn't a salary cap, which team would have the best roster?
I mean, any team, because you wouldn't have a salary cap, right? So you could just be. Are you saying like what team has the best starting point?
I'm taking it as here's
How
I
are you
take
taking
it.
it? How are you taking this?
I think it's a revenue question. So like in baseball,
Oh, got you.
in baseball, there's no salary cap. So and now there's a lot of teams like the Rays and the Guardians and the Twins even that have found ways to just win 90 games with a third of the payroll. But here's what's crazy about the NFL. Most of the revenue is national TV revenue.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's the only sport where you can have a team in Green Bay, Wisconsin and Jacksonville, Florida compete with New York and LA. And most teams bring in between $500 and $600 million in annual revenue, except there's like a handful of teams that bring in so much merchandise and, new stadium money. Like the Raiders, the Rams, the Giants, the Niners, and the Patriots are all kind of a level above everyone else. And then there's the Cowboys that bring in like double what the average team does. So like probably the Cowboys. You have a desperate old rich owner and you bring in more merchandise revenue than anybody else.
And
right?
I was gonna say Texas too, because players will want to play where there's no state income tax.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, Dallas is kind of and that if you go to Dallas, you're gonna get a ton of notoriety. So you're gonna get a bunch of off the field stuff, right? On top of no salary cap, it has to be Dallas. It 100% has to be Dallas. And I think I want to say weirdly that New York might be the second with the Giants, just because it's a huge market. Like those guys are crazy too. I could see New York being up there too, but yeah, that's definitely Dallas's. I mean, who it's not, the Bengals, like the Panthers, right? Like those are the teams that I don't think like they just don't make enough money to be able to fund everything that they would want to.
But it's like, again, baseball, most of the money that comes in is local TV money, local ticket money. So bigger market equals more demand, more people to fill the seats. You can charge more money for tickets, more eyeballs to watch the TV product. So the local team can charge more money or gets more money from advertisers. So it's in the NFL, that Fox deal, that NBC deal, that gets divvied up 32 different ways. Like Jerry Jones doesn't make more money off NBC than, Bob from Onalaska that owns the Packers with his little certificate. So, I mean, the Cowboys, the Giants, just because they're going to have a little bit more merchandising.
A little more
revenue,
merchandise, a little more marketing.
Austin HB asks, does the coaching staff allow star players to voice opinions on coaching hires or personnel moves?
Personnel moves, yes. I don't think maybe if you're the franchise QB if you're Patrick Mahomes and for whatever reason Andy Reid retires and moves on, I think he's probably going to get a say in who the next head coach is going to be, right? But very rarely do. I mean, there's probably maybe one or two guys on each team that would be able to even have a seat at the table, let alone a voice in the like decision process. But yeah, I mean, players all the time will have decisions in who do we want to keep, who do you like, who don't you like. Like the veterans in the rooms will always, a lot of those guys will get consulted of like, hey, how do you feel about this player? Like he's a bubble guy. If we had to take one of these two guys, who would it be? Like there's definitely a lot of veterans that get put into that. I also think that there's some veterans that'll get put into the positional coaching. Like, hey, I know a guy who's been with me forever. I mean, I know when the Vikings brought Uwe over, the assistant or the strength coach from San Fran, like they talked to Boone about it. They talked to some guys around the league that had been with him. Like, what do you think? Like, oh, he'd be great. He'd be good. So I think that they take polling from the players, but obviously the end all be all being the GM or the owner who kind of makes those decisions. But I do think there is a little bit of like, how do you feel about this guy? And if it's a huge red flag, then maybe that's another piece of the puzzle when they're trying to put it together.
See, like on the Vikings front, I remember right before the trade deadline last year. So on Sunday, Kirk Cousins tears his Achilles, out for the season. Trade deadline is 48 hours on Tuesday. And the Vikings were 4-4, but you're starting Nick Mullins and whoever it wound up being Josh Dobbs off the street. And Danielle Hunter was set to be a free agent. Now we saw, who was it? The Bears traded for
Sweat.
For Sweat, like a second round pick.
And Chase Young, and then the Niners traded for Chase Young.
Yep. So like I don't know if you get a first round pick, but probably a second round pick for a guy that's going to walk. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Vikings GM, came out and publicly said, yeah, I actually talked to the leaders in the locker room and I kind of ran it by them. And they said, don't trade Danielle Hunter. Let's keep pushing forward. And that struck me as an example of, you definitely want to listen to your players, but does that team really have a chance to do anything meaningful with backup quarterbacks? You also don't want to send the wrong message to a locker room of 53 guys and the coaching staff. But that's probably an example of, you just have to play the bad guy and get your second round pick in retrospect.
Yeah, and middle of season too, no one's ever going to be like, yes, trade our superstar. Because guess what? We hate losing too. Like, it sucks. Coming to work after a loss week in and week out is awful, right? I went 6-10 with the Bills, dude. That was a tough year, right? Tough year. You're just coming into work and you're like, well, maybe we can win this week. Not sure, right? Like, you didn't have that great success feeling of, like, I can do this. We can roll. And, you know, I think that if middle of the season, if you're like, hey, should we trade the all-pro pass rusher? No, we don't want you to trade him. But I agree with you. There becomes a point when you have to look at the broader landscape and be like, oh, yeah, but what are we actually going to do with him this week, like, or this year? Like, are we going to re-sign him? Is he going to be affordable? All those things. And so, you know, yeah, there's time and a place, off-season being one where you can have more of an objection, thousand-eye view as a player to look in at things and be like, okay, what are we thinking? But you're never going to get a rational response out of players when you're asking about personnel decisions in the middle of the year.
Yeah. Do you have time for one more?
Absolutely.
Or do we have to wrap here?
No, let's roll.
Okay. Will the Jedi on the YouTube comment says, how do players and coaches deal with playing against former teammates or teams? So, for example, if Team A plays Team B, and a player who used to play on Team A is now on Team B, and this happens, like a guy will get waived. Sometimes
it's happened to me.
Okay. So how does that work? You used to be in the trenches with this team. Now you're over here. Are they tapping you for information, or what's going on?
Oh, yeah. So 2015, I got traded to the Vikings, and the Chargers were coming to town week 3, I think it was. And I got pulled into the D-line coach's office, and he was like, tell me everything. And I was like, I called my agent, and I was like, okay, he was like, after practice, tell me everything. And I called my agent. I was like, what do we do here? Like, is this like backstabbing? Is this like, it was just kind of an inner conflict. And I remember agent was like, who writes your checks? I was like, got it.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I walked right into, oh gosh, what was the D-line? Andre
Patterson.
I walked right into Andre Patterson's on, and I was like, all right, here's how they do every protection, right? This is how they line it up. Here's the calls that they make. Like, here's what they're going to do to try and mess with you. This is the backup calls to the backup calls. If you hear this check, it's a wide receiver screen, right? Because I knew that offense like the back of my hand because I had to in order to make that team. And so I knew everything. And when I tell you that we beat the living hell out of Phillip Rivers, and I almost felt bad by how well like Anthony Barr and Everson, everyone was getting home. Like, I felt kind of bad, but I was like, I guess, I don't know. I think that's the right thing to do. And I actually talked to, who was it? I think it was Kellen Clemens, who was the backup quarterback. I talked to him a few years later, and he came up to me. He's like, did you sell us down the river when we played you guys? I was like, oh, yeah. He's like, we thought so. And like, it was bad. Like, but I mean, at the end of the day, you play for who signs your checks. Right. And so like, and you can't change everything. Right. Like, you can have a few code words here and there, but like for 1 week, you're not going to be like, hey, we know that we had a guy in our training camp, in our thing that was here with us all the way up to the end. We're going to change everything this week, right? It just doesn't logically make sense. So you have to try and just overcome it a little bit. But yeah, when I tell you I gave the Vikings the keys to the kingdom, the answers to the test on how to beat Phillip Rivers and his blitz protection, yeah, it sucked. But yeah, at the end of the day, you kind of just roll with it.
That's so fat. I feel like you see all the time these like fringe roster guys. Like Emir Smith-Marset was a fringe roster receiver from the Vikings. Bears pick him up. You know, maybe that's something. Maybe the Bears are seeing a talented guy regardless of where he was before. But there, if you can lean toward, we're going to play this team twice. It'd be nice to know some of the things that they talk about in the huddle. It makes total sense why you see that. So it's a good question.
You sell them down the river, man. They didn't want you. They didn't want you. It's not your fault. Sell them down the river.
Yeah, who signs your checks, kids? Who signs your checks?
Yep. Do not bite the hand that feeds, as my dad would always say.
So keep hitting us up with your dumb football questions here. We'll keep plowing through this offseason, and maybe we can get the band back together. Maybe you and Boone and me can all be in the same place at the same time next week.
I think this may be the least amount of F-bombs ever dropped on an O-line committee podcast.
I feel like I've only dropped like 2 ever in the audience because I don't swear on the Score North podcast.
The audience
they love
it. They love it. When you drop one, they're like, "Oh, he's human."
When you're bound by FCC regulations for 20 years, you're definitely gun shy.
Boone's not bound by anything.
No.
But yes,
no,
we'll all be back together next week.
Yep. So that's a wrap. O-line committee. Thank you guys again for getting us to 20,000 YouTube subscribers. The best way you can help us is to keep listening or watching and click that like button and the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. For Jay, I'm Phil. We'll see you guys next week.